This video was brought to you by my 2,000 subscribers. This video wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you. When it comes to playing with trains, I'd say the best part for me is building the layout. Whether it be big, small, or medium-sized, there's just something so satisfying about building a huge track and letting your trains run around it. And there are many railway brands you can do this with. Wayrail, Trackmaster, Wooden Railway, Take and Play, even model railways. As you know, the main layout that I use in my videos is a Trackmaster 2 layout that spans across the entire basement. And you also know that over the past few years I've had it up, it has gone through many changes and alterations over the years. But what you probably don't know is that there are a few earlier layouts that actually came before this one. So instead of making this video kind of like the previous layout video that I did, which was 5 years ago to be exact,
I seriously need to get around to doing an updated layout tour of this thing.
We are going to instead take a look at every single Trackmaster 2 layout I have ever made, from the very start to current present day. You better hold on tight for this ride, because we're going to dive deep into the archive of videos I never uploaded for this one. So, what am I calling this video exactly? I'm calling it the evolution of my Trackmaster 2 layouts. Let's start from the beginning. So before we dive into the layouts, I feel like we need to go back and talk about why Trackmaster Revolution exists in the first place. It all started in 2013, when Mattel lost the license to make Disney princess toys. It might also explain why Tommy did the merchandise for The Good Dinosaur and Inside Out. To combat this setback, Mattel decided to cheapen out on the quality of some of their top brands, one of them being Thomas. Around February 2014, it was revealed that Take and Play was getting a new one-way magnet couplings and Trackmaster was getting a complete redesign. The engines were made with a simplified chassis that was interchangeable with any character, made them run faster, and be able to climb steeper inclines. Albeit only on their new track system. When this redesign was revealed at New York Toy Fair, everyone was appalled by it. Well, except me. I was one of the few people that didn't mind the switch to Trackmaster Revolution. I honestly didn't mind if the trains struggled on older tracks. In fact, the first two Revolution items I got, which were Gator and Timothy, performed decently well on both Wayrail and classic Trackmaster tracks with no modifications to their chassis. Well, as long as they were running on fresh batteries, or just running on standard straights and curves. I didn't have any Revolution track until September 2014, so I had to work with what I had. Speaking of that, let's finally get on to talking about the first layout. The first time we see footage of my Trackmaster 2 layouts is in a short video I made of one of my Playrail layouts. The video starts off with Steven pulling a narrow gauge coach under the suspension bridge. Then I run over to another area of the track to see a bullet train pulling a super long consist. Following that, the camera pans over to an unfinished section of classic Trackmaster track with Gator on it. The video then ends with me saying, "That," and pointing at the section of track. The reason the video ended here is because the battery died on the camera I was filming with. But what I was going to say was, that there is where I will be putting the Sodor Spiral expansion pack, aka the first Trackmaster 2 set I ever got. I sadly don't have footage of the finished track, but the only difference there was that instead of the classic Trackmaster track being a complete straight, there was a little squiggle that came after the spiral, since the spiral was made of CS curves. Shortly after getting the Sodor spiral, I would end up getting another track pack, the Ice and Snow expansion pack. The two track packs were connected to each other to create a slightly bigger layout. The engine started by traversing through the Ice and Snow expansion pack by going up the small ramp and going down the small spiral. The trains would then climb up the ramp of the Sodor spiral and go down the spiral itself. The circuit was then completed using classic Trackmaster track and some extra track adapters. This form of the layout was interestingly the one where I ran more classic Trackmaster trains than Trackmaster 2 ones. The reason for this is probably because this was when I made my custom Halloween trains and made the layout all spooky. So I might as well call this form of the layout the Spooky Track. Following that layout, sometime in November, I got another expansion pack, that being the Gordon's Hill expansion pack. For this layout, instead of rearranging everything, I just expanded upon the previous one by attaching Gordon's Hill to the bottom of the Sodor spiral. The directions the train ran for this layout was reversed compared to the previous one. The engine started out by going across the section of classic Trackmaster track. Then they would climb up Gordon's Hill and race down the other side. The engines would then climb up the Sodor spiral and race down its ramp, and then finish it off by traversing through the Ice and Snow expansion pack. This layout was the one where I ran my Revolution engines more than the classics, because the older engines kept getting stuck on the last bit of Gordon's Hill, and would also sometimes crash at the bottom of the ramp. Obviously, that isn't to say that the Revolutions were safe from these crashes as well. Shortly after getting Gordon's Hill, the next expansion pack I would end up getting would be the Tunnel expansion pack. This is the first pack I got where I had no idea on how I was going to add it to the layout. This is most likely a guess, as I only have one small bit of footage to back this up, but it is possible that I made some small track next to it that featured Tommy track and had the tunnel pack attached to it. Shortly after, I ended up taking both tracks down and would end up using the tunnel pack and most likely the Ice and Snow expansion pack in the Christmas tree track for 2014. I also ended up getting the Snowy Mountain Rescue set around this time. The next update to this layout happened during Christmas 2014. This was the first major Trackmaster 2 layout I had built, as it consisted of a lot of new things. Avalanche Escape, Snowy Mountain Rescue, the Tunnel Pack, another Sodor Spiral, and a bunch of new engines. It was also the first layout to not use a single piece of classic Trackmaster track. This was also the first layout to have more than one circuit of track. The first circuit was the Avalanche Escape set, which was ran by Gator. Gator was for some reason the only engine who could make it around the set without derailing on the switch after the tunnel. He did derail sometimes, but not as often as the others. The other circuit was more freelance and had Spencer running on it. The circuit started with a long stretch of straight track that had the tunnel and a small hill towards the end of it. Spencer would then loop around some curves and climb up one of the steepest hills I have ever built. Interestingly, Spencer was the only one who could climb this hill. After climbing the steep hill, Spencer would go over the bridge of Gordon's Hill and race down the other side, traversing into the Snowy Mountain Rescue set. After going through the set, Spencer could go one of two ways. The first way was going back around the Snowy Mountain Rescue set. The other way was leaving the set and going back to the long stretch of straight track. The two circuits were connected via the Sodor spiral, making everything one big layout. This layout would stay up until January 1st, 2015. After that, everything had to be moved downstairs, and that was when a new layout was starting to form. The first form of this layout was very different from the previous layout that was upstairs. Being downstairs meant I had more room to put tracks, but since I only had just a few sets, the layout only took over the middle of the basement at this point. The layout was a freelance combination of the sets I had, with the Avalanche Escape being the big centerpiece. There were a total of 2 circuits when this layout started to form. The first circuit was the main one. The engines would start by traversing to the Avalanche Escape set. After going through the Avalanche's tunnel, the engines would pass a switch and go over a small bridge which would lead to a huge spiral. The spiral was created using the two Sodor spiral packs and the snowy spiral curves from the two snow sets. After climbing up the spiral, the engines would race down another one of the steepest gradients I have ever made. Not a single engine could climb up this one. The ramp was so steep that tender engines would crash on it if they had their tenders attached going down it. After racing down the ramp, the engines would loop around through a tunnel and under the steep ramp. The main circuit would be completed with the engines going over a small hill and returning to the Avalanche escape set. Going back to the switch before the small bridge, the track would go
Past the crane from the Snowy Mountain Rescue set,
under the red support for the Avalanche escape and curve around the yellow support before reaching a small oval track that had the mountain tunnel from the Snowy Mountain Rescue set. This was the second circuit of this layout. Shortly after, another switch was added onto the small oval, which would basically loop around and come back down before reaching a dead end. This small loop was basically made of the extra pieces I had left over as I wanted to use them somewhere. The next update this layout got was in February, when I got the Mad Dash on Sodor set. This set was attached to what was originally the dead end loop. The extra curves and classic Trackmaster straights were removed to make it work. This set ended up taking over a majority of the front part of the basement. It was also the first part of this layout to not be freelance built. The only freelance section of this part was by the Y switch that was located next to Cranky. The track darted off through some extra curves and two classic Trackmaster straights before reaching a dead end. This dead end would soon get extended with more classic Trackmaster straights about a week or two later. The next major update this layout had was at the start of March. I had recently gotten the Breakaway Bridge set and the Hazard Tracks expansion pack alongside Diesel, and both items were attached onto the section of classic Trackmaster straights. I really liked adding onto the dead end sections, didn't I? The route to get to this area started by going on the right side of the Y switch next to Cranky. Then the engines would take some turns before going across the stretch of classic Trackmaster track. After that, the engines would twist and turn through the hazard tracks, and finally, they would reach the Breakaway Bridge. There was also a switch track next to the Hazard Tracks expansion pack that ran straight into a dead end, and you probably guessed it by now that this is where the next expansion to this layout happened. So, the next few expansions to this layout don't have any footage or pictures, so I am going to go off what I remember from my memory. The next thing I would end up getting was another Gordon's Hill expansion pack. The classic Trackmaster straights ended up getting replaced with the straights from this pack. The dead end by the Hazard Tracks pack was also expanded upon using a curve, the bridge, and the rest of the straights from this extra Gordon's Hill pack. After that, the next few things I ended up getting throughout the next few months were the Water Tower Starter set, Treasure Chase set, and Dynamite Delivery expansion pack. These were added onto the second dead end zone and curved around the side of the couch before reaching a tunnel made out of my storage buckets. The tunnel would lead to Augsburg Harbor. This was before I saw Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, so I thought that the cavern that Thomas fell into in the trailer was how the engines got to Augsburg Harbor. And that, to my knowledge, was the last thing that was added to this layout before I took it down and made a new one. Which also doesn't have any footage or pictures to show. So with this layout having absolutely no footage, it will be hard to visually explain everything. This layout started to form when I got the Crisscross Junction expansion pack. The front part of the basement consisted of the Crisscross Junction, followed by a huge mountain of track that basically used up all my risers I had at the time. The track would then coast down the mountain and back to the Crisscross Junction. Underneath the mountain was a small oval of track that I called Thomas's Branch Line. I think, but I am not too sure, the corner that featured Augsburg Harbor from the previous track stayed where it was. The middle part of the basement had the tracks leading to the Avalanche escape set. After going down the Avalanche and through the reset tunnel, making the engines have no way of coming back, the tracks would curve off and lead to the Dinosaur Park, which was created using the two volcano sets that were made that year. There was also a bit of speculation of adding the Motorized Railway King of the Railway set next to the Dinosaur Park, but that never happened. And that pretty much marks the end for this layout. Sometime shortly afterwards, I would end up taking a break from the trains as I had shifted over to Hot Wheels for a bit. The Hot Wheels trucks ended up taking over the front yard, basement, and garage until sometime in June 2016, which is when the trains started to make a comeback by me making a huge Play-Doh layout in the basement. There was also the pool trucks that I made back in May 2016, which initially sparked the return to the trains. It wasn't until either September, October, or November that I would start to build a brand new Trackmaster Revolution layout. Well folks, we now reach the part you've all been waiting for. The part where I talk about how the layout that has stayed up for 8 years has evolved over the years it's been up. This layout will be divided into sections: the beta stage, development stage, redesigning / current stage, as well as give you some future plans that I have in mind for this layout. So, let's get started as we travel back to 2016. The first bit of footage that was shown of this layout comes from some clips that were made on an app called Musical.ly. No, not what it is referred to as now, but back when it was called Musical.ly. The footage mainly showed random docks, which was one of the first things I built, but it had 2 tracks instead of 1. It was also very plain looking, as the only destinations that were there were the Cranky and Brendan Bay building from the Mad Dash on Sodor set. There was also another problem. Around the area where the ferry dock was located, there was a track that overlapped a different one. This meant that there was no way for an engine to use that track. This was one of the reasons why I changed it to 1 set of tracks. The other reason was because I had converted about half of my Trackmaster Revolution straights to work with pool tracks, which I didn't want to use on the layout. This meant I was running out of straight track. So Brendan Docks was converted from 2 tracks to 1. I even ended up getting a straight track pack around this time to help me get more straights. Although, I would end up using the pool track straights on the mainline strips a little later. After Brendan Docks, the next thing I worked on was the Sodor China clay pits. Around this time, the clay pits were pretty small, and it only consisted of 3 sets: breakaway bridge, hazard tracks, and the tunnel expansion pack. Fun fact, the setup for the clay pits before it got expanded was actually based on one of the layouts that came from that Trackmaster Interactive Railway Builder website that everyone has forgotten about. The only difference in my version was that instead of having a TRS switch be located here, the switch was placed directly after the Hazard Tracks expansion pack, and I ended up using a good majority of my track adapters for the straight sections. I may have used one too many in one area though, because this section would become very warpy in the next few years. The next thing I worked on was the big spiral and the mountain that followed it. This area was very different compared to what it is now. Originally, there were going to be 3 spirals. The first one would lead to the track that goes over the dangerous bucket and down the steep ramp and around the twisty turns. The twisty turns at this time used parts from the Treasure Chase set. Those parts being the brown ramp that Skiff would ride down, as well as the starting point for Skiff, which resided under the bed. The tracks would then come out from the bed and go to either the clay pits or a water tower with a siding next to it. The second spiral is the one that would shoot straight back down the 3rd steepest incline I have ever made in a Trackmaster 2 layout. This was the least steep out of the 3, as any Revolution engine can climb this hill. Well, except for the egg. After racing down the hill, the engines would head toward a switch. One way led to a dead end, while the other would lead to the front half of the basement. We will get to that later. Another thing about the second spiral is that it was missing 2 middle riser pieces towards the top at this time. And last but not least, we have the 3rd spiral. This one was never finished, mainly because I had already used pretty much all of my risers to make the other 2 spirals, as well as the mountain that followed it. But this one branched off Brendan Dock, and it would have taken the engines across a track that was higher than the first spiral. It even went over the mountain section of the first one. The tracks would then slope and curve down as they would go over the water tower and under the bed. There were also a few other tracks that branched off this spiral that will come into play in just a moment. The next major expansion happened during Christmas 2016 when I got the Sky High Bridge Jump, Railway Race Set, Over Under Tidmouth Bridge, and the Railway Builder Bucket. Let's start by talking about the back of the basement. The back of the basement is where the bridge jump and railway race were located. The two sets were set up in their playset form with some slight add-ons. The bridge jump had some switches that darted off from it that formed two mainline strips. Only one was finished at the time. The one that was finished connected to the clay pits. The other strip would have a few switches. One of them would go under the bridge jump tunnel and connect to the other main line. These two mainline strips were where I used the majority of my pool track straights. The railway race set was located next to the bridge jump at this time, and it wasn't connected to anything. Now, let's move to the front of the basement. The front of the basement was very unfinished at this point in time. There were multiple tracks that would branch off of the second spiral that were going to lead to Knapford Station, which only had one platform completed at the time. That one platform was the one that would lead to the second spiral, and on the other side, traverse over the cross track from the Builder Bucket. The inspiration for this came from one of Trackmaster Toy Train Village's layouts, where he had a huge spiral section that resided behind Knapford Station. Also located behind Knapford was the Switch, Stop, and Signal expansion pack, which would lead into the two spirals, or go to Brendam Docks. The next part that was added was the Scrapyard, which was located next to Knapford. Originally, I was going to have this part lead straight into the Avalanche Escape set and traverse over Tidmouth Bridge, but that was quickly changed and soon became a track that turned off and went over the orange bridges from the Gordon's Hill expansion packs before curving back down. Tidmouth Bridge ended up becoming its own section around a countryside area of the layout, which was very unfinished at this time. There were no stations, no base plates, and no windmill. There was also a Y switch that came after the bridge. The next major update this layout had was in February 2017, when I got quite a few new things. Percy's Midnight Mail Delivery, Switchback Swamp, another straight track pack, and a Switches and Turnouts track pack. This was the moment the layout started to get some of its circuits. The mail depot and post office were added at the bottom of the second spiral's ramp, and an overhead track was added next to the Switch, Stop, and Signal pack. The spooky hay bale was also added on a set of straights next to the orange bridges, and the tunnel was placed at the bottom of the second spiral. Knapford Station got 2 more bays completed around this time as well. A little later that same month, I would get a few more things: the 5-in-1 Builder set, the 2-in-1 Destination set, and the Tidmouth Turntable expansion pack. It was around this time that the Avalanche Escape would be added to the orange bridges and would act as Gordon's Hill. I also managed to complete another circuit of track around this time. This one would go over Tidmouth Bridge, go past the unfinished station section, go under the Avalanche, past Tidmouth Sheds, and head back to Tidmouth Bridge. Some other things that happened around this time was the railway race set was moved to the end of the bridge jump as the siding had taken its original place. This siding was going to be the original location of the experimental engine yard. Another thing that happened was that the other mainline strip was completed, and Brendam Docks got an extra switch track, making it a complete circuit. The next update to the layout was made when I got the Thomas's Shipwreck Rail set. This was when the Dangerous Mountain got a major redesign, as I was going to build Owlsburg Harbor. All the pieces of the Treasure Chase set were removed from the mountain and switched with the spiral track parts and normal track. The Dynamite Delivery was also replaced with the Coal Hopper from the 2-in-1 Destination set. Owlsburg Harbor was built in a small corner of the front of the basement where a black chair used to reside. This area consisted of the 3 Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure sets: Shipwreck Rails, Treasure Chase, and Dynamite Delivery. Also around the same time frame, I would get the Icy Mountain Drift set. The set would get placed on the switch track next to the post office and would mark the start of the Blue Mountain Quarry. Only 2 other things were added onto the set at this time: the Blue Mountain Quarry building from the Mad Dash on Sodor set, and an unfinished spiral. There will be more to come here later. There was also some other minor changes around this time. The ramp to the second spiral had a change in risers, and the countryside area would gain some base plates and destinations. One of these buildings is actually an Easter egg to the first video I uploaded to this channel. The layout got its next major update when I got 2 more sets. Those sets being Demolition at the Docks and Close Call Cliff set. The Demolition at the Docks set was added onto Brendam Docks, giving it an extra cranky as well as a new warehouse building. And the Close Call Cliff set was added onto the highest point of the Blue Mountain Quarry. Speaking of, the Blue Mountain Quarry also expanded a tiny bit at this time. There was now a spiral of track that led to a bridge that went over the icy mountain drift, which made the drift part of the set inaccessible. The next update we see to the layout is when I made a video of me touring the layout. The updates that were featured in this tour were that one of the ramps that led to Knapford was changed and now went between the spiral and led to a cross track. The other thing that got updated at this time was the Blue Mountain Quarry. The bridge that went over the icy mountain drift had tracks added onto it that continued to go up behind the couch and through the fireplace and through the Blue Mountain Quarry building from the Mad Dash on Sodor set. After that, the tracks went up even more just before reaching the top where the Close Call Cliff set was located. The bottom section of the quarry was also updated. There were now a few extra tracks, as well as an unfinished ramp that would act as an alternative route to get to the area behind the couch. The Close Call Cliff set also got a minor track layout adjustment as well. Around June 2017 is when the next update happened. The small crane from the Snowy Mountain Rescue set was removed from the clay pits to make room for the Daring Derail set. The set resided right underneath the Dangerous Mountain section and would also traverse under the Breakaway Bridge. About a month after this, there was a small addition to the mainland, that being the bridge that Thomas crossed in Journey Beyond Sodor. This bridge was cleverly made using the guardrails that would go at the bottom of huge ramps, but they were inserted into the base piece upside down. Later that August, the clay pits got another update. The third spiral was removed due to the fact I knew I wouldn't have been able to get a few more spiral expansion packs, so I decided to change it. A Y-switch was added onto the Daring Derail set, which went past the small crane from the Snowy Mountain Rescue set. After that, the tracks went up and around a few curves before coming back down and around to Brendam Docks. This basically acted as a loop line for the clay pits. Because of this change, I also got a few straights back, so I decided to add them onto the tracks that continued from Knapford Station. The next update would happen in November, when Brendam Docks would get a new resident known as Carly. Carly was situated on 2 small strips of wooden railway straight track. The wooden railway track fit snugly between the 2 cranes and had just enough space for Carly to move back and forth. December 2017 was a big month for updates and is the last part of the beta stage of the layout. In the middle of December, I would finally get to open the superstation after having it sit in the basement in its box for a few months. The black chair that used to be in the corner was located next to the bridge jump at this time. The chair was removed from the basement entirely to make room for the superstation. The superstation was set up in its dueling raceway layout, but with an extra set of tracks at the bottom to make it a full circuit. And for Christmas that year, I would receive the Brave Bridge Collapse, Head-to-Head Crossing, and the Scrapyard Escape set. The Head-to-Head Crossing replaced the crane from the Snowy Mountain Rescue set at the clay pits. The Brave Bridge Collapse was placed where the other mainland bridge used to be, and the Scrapyard Escape set was placed in the bathroom, as this is where the steelworks was going to be located. And that marks the end of the beta stage for the current layout. There were a lot of things that started out one way and were changed later on. Everything moving forward will be a bit more consistent and will focus more on add-ons. With that being said, let's move on to the next stage of this layout. The development stage of this layout began when I got the Twisting Tornado set in January 2018. This set would be used as the experimental engine yard on my layout. Located next to it was Beresford and a cross-track that was originally part of the Blue Mountain Quarry, as that had got reverted back to its original track setup at this time, just with 2 pieces from the Mad Dash on Sodor being added onto it. those pieces being the red cargo dropper and the tall hopper thing. Moving on to February 2018, I would get two new things, the Blue Mountain Track Bucket and the Tunnel Blast set. The Tunnel Blast was added onto the clay pits via a switch that was next to the loop line. The tracks would go through the tunnel, onto the loop line, through the middle of the spiral, and connect up to the other side of the head-to-head crossing. Meanwhile, the Blue Mountain Quay would get a major expansion. The Blue Mountain Track Bucket would be added to the Blue Mountain Quay, which would complete that alternate ramp to get to the back area, as well as create a few small sidings and an unfinished bridge. Also around the same time, I would get the Glowing Mine set. The parts to this set were placed all over the layout. The bridge tunnel was placed next to Ellsberg Harbor, the green ramps were used in between the superstation and the water tower, the cargo dropper was placed in the steelworks, and the rest of the track was used to close up gaps in the layout. There was also a Thomas Wood backdrop added by the orange bridges to hide the Blue Mountain Quarry from view. The layout got its next expansion when I got a second 2-in-1 destination set. This was so I could have the watermill be somewhere on the layout, as I had used my first one for the coal hopper. The watermill was added onto where the green ramps from the Glowing Mine set were located. Also around this time, the diesel works would gain a small loop of track underneath it that wasn't connected to anything at this time. Later that August, I would get three new things: Turbo Percy, Hyperglow Nia, and the Hyperglow Station. A few days prior to getting these things, the big white couch that was located behind Gordon's Hill was removed from the basement to make room for the Hyperglow Station. The other changes that happened were that the Lava Falls Volcano was replaced with a turbo track, the other turbo track was placed right before the bridge collapse, and the 3 half-straights of glow-in-the-dark track were added onto the tunnel bridge from the Glowing Mine set. 2 months later, I would get the Turbo Thomas and place his turbo tracks onto the layout. There wouldn't be another update until Christmas, but that update sure was a big one. For Christmas 2018, I would get the Turbo Jungle set, Boat and Sea set, Percy 6-in-1 set, Glowing Track Bucket, Turbo Diesel, and 2 more Demolition at the Dock sets. The first major thing that needed to happen was that the exercise machine that was located near the bridge jump had to be moved out of the basement to make room for the Turbo Jungle set. The Boat and Sea set was attached directly onto it, which would connect Brazil to Sodor via a new engine dock. Other updates to the layout were a Y-switch was added next to Tim's sheds, which went through the Glowing Mine tunnel and over some glow-in-the-dark track before reaching the Hyperglow Station. A small siding was added to the Hyperglow Station. A set of points was added to the clay pits to complete the line that ran over the head-to-head crossing and through the tunnel blast. The Blue Mountain Quarry would get its extra bridge track finished. The steelworks would get a slight upgrade with some cross tracks and the hill to dump molten slag, and Diesel's turbo tracks were added to the layout. However, shortly after getting Turbo Diesel, his motor ended up burning out. So we ordered another one from Target, which gave me 2 more turbo tracks to add to the layout. Only one of them was added at the time because I had no idea where to put the last one. The next update would happen in February 2019, and this is where the low point of the layout expansions come in, as a good majority of them would be in the international corner. I ended up getting 3 sets for my birthday: the Monkey Palace set, Dragon Escape set, and the Push Along Thomas's Mail Delivery set. The 2 international sets were placed in the corner next to the bridge and the Turbo Jungle set. As for the mail delivery set, the cross track would end up getting used at the steelworks as it would go under another change in track configuration. The signal light was placed at Knapford Station, and the mail building was placed next to the mail depot. Throughout the rest of 2019, the layout would go through very minor changes. I would get the Hyperglow Ashima in June and add her half-straight tracks to the layout, and in August, the Spooky Hay Bale would be moved to the siding at the Hyperglow Station to make room for a station and road crossing in its place. Also around that time, I would get the new Builder Bucket. There were only 3 pieces I used from this pack at the time: a TR switch and 2 straights. The switch and one of the straights would complete the path that would traverse over the tunnel bridge from the Glowing Mine set, and the other straight was placed in the steelworks. Later that Christmas, I would get the Cave Collapse set, Super Cruiser, Thompson Neo Cargo Delivery set, and Hyperglow Kevin. The Monkey Palace and Dragon Escape would end up swapping sides to make room for the cave collapse. Dragon Escape would also swap its straights for curves. Brazil would also get a major redesign at this time. The straight track right before the blue ramp curves was changed to a switch. The tracks would go under the blue ramp curves and curve around just before going up. It would then traverse over the switch with a delivery shed, then curve and go back down just before reaching another delivery spot and an unfinished section because I ran out of TL switches. And that marks the end of 2019. We now move on to the year of 2020, the year where the entire world fell apart, the year where we all had to stay in our homes and stare at a computer screen for hours. And also the year where Trackmaster Revolution got a complete rebrand! Around February 2020, during the New York Toy Fair, it was revealed that Trackmaster would be getting rebranded into two ranges, motorized and push-along. This was also the year where they started to make the sets feel like train sets again instead of constant stunt gimmicks. Well, for the most part. 2020 started off pretty slow for the layout expansions, but as soon as the fall hits, the layout would enter its next stage of development. The first update the layout had in 2020 was that the red bridge from the Percy 61 set was added to Brazil, as it looked nicer than an icy riser from the Icy Mountain Drift set. About a month or two later, the Arsdale Railway would begin to be built, starting with the ballast chute. I came up with the clever idea of using the tunnel bridge from the 61 set as the ballast chute, seeing that it had tracks on the top and bottom, a danger gate, and the bridge parts had holes in them, making it seem like ballast could fall through. And that marks the end of the development stage of the layout. As October lied just around the corner, so did a new era of the layout. We now enter the final stage of the layout, and also the stage that the layout is still currently in. This is the stage where the layout got just about as much expansions as the beta stage. So let's get started as we enter October 2020. October 2020 saw the arrival of the push-along Knapford Station set. This would mark the first major redesign to the layout since the removal of the third spiral. The original custom-built Knapford Station was torn up and the new Knapford was put in its place. The third track also had to be modified a little so that it would work with the new Knapford. Other than Knapford, the upper track that went through the mail depot had gained the bridge and sign from the Knapford Station set. With one redesign down, there would be lots more to come. Around Christmas 2020, I would receive a bunch of new sets. All Around Sodor, Walking Bridge, Animal Park Monkey Adventure, Diesel Tunnel Blast, and the Cassia Crane and Cargo set. Starting off with Sodor updates, the Vickerstown Bridge ended up being an alternative route where instead of taking the jump, the engines can now drive in the middle of the jump and go over the Vickerstown Bridge from the all-around Sodor set. The tracks would then curve back down, go past the billboard, and connect back to the start of the bridge jump set. And in the front of the basement near Tidmouth Sheds, the toy box and bookshelf were removed to make room for the walking bridge and the Sodor Animal Park. I had to also remove the siding from the Hyperglow station as I needed switch tracks to connect the two sets to the rest of the layout. So now the spooky hay bale sits lonely with no tracks. I do want to bring the siding back eventually. Also in the front of the basement, the blue straight from the 2019 track bucket was removed and Roof's windmill took its place. The blue line sign was also placed nearby it. The clay pits would gain the tunnel from the Diesel Tunnel Blast set, the bridge before Knapford would gain 2 more signs, and Knapford itself would get another signal light. As for other places, the Steelworks would gain an extra switch, and Brazil would get one last update. The Cassia Crane set was added to Brazil, which would cause the upper track of the temple to get rearranged. The tracks would now curve more before coming down and around the Cassia set. The dead end was also completed as a switch from the all-around Sodor set was added to complete the circuit. Moving on to 2021, the layout would go back to receiving very minimal updates. Some of the updates that were planned for this year were pushed back to 2022 because of how disastrous Mattel's distribution of some items were this year. I'm looking at you, Carly and Nia and the elephant set. The first 2 things that happened with the layout this year was that the track that went through the diesel works was finally going somewhere, that being to an unfinished spiral. The other change was that the experimental engine yard got a major redesign. The original cross track was changed to the new one, the tornado set wasn't a loop of track anymore, and there was only one way the engines could go, making it impossible for engines to get to the steelworks. A little later in April, another location would get a major redesign, that being Tidmouth Sheds. I had managed to find all 3 Connect and Go sheds on Walmart's website for normal price, and I immediately jumped on getting them. Once they arrived, 3 of the Tommy sheds were removed, and the Connect and Go sheds were put in their place. The orange shed was also replaced with one of the Tommy sheds. For the next few months, updates to the layout would become very quiet as I was focusing on saving my money for the Alpha Group Chuggington merch, and because Mattel's distribution was pretty bad that year. Apart from getting Paxton in the summer, I didn't get a single Trackmaster item until December. And that would be when one of the redesigns that I had mentioned earlier would finally happen. Christmas 2021 saw the arrival of the Trains and Cranes Super Tower and the Thomas and Percy Cargo Race. The Cargo Race featured one of the 2 items I was desperate for that year, the Sodor Suspension Bridge. The bucket of the Dangerous Mountain was removed and replaced with proper risers and the Sodor Suspension Bridge. One of the risers of the mountain had to be changed to an Action Canyon riser, as the original one was used to hold up the bridge. Other things that happened were the red bridge from the Cargo Race was added next to the orange bridge from the Golden Hill expansion packs, the signal from the same set were added to Knapford Station, and the experimental engine yard was destroyed to make room for the Super Tower. That is until it got its second redesign shortly after. With this redesign, Beresford was pushed forward to be before the switch that led to the railway race set. After the switch, the tracks would curve up before reaching a new style Y-switch. One path led the tracks back down into the Super Tower, while the other path went to the Tornado. After going through the Tornado, the tracks would go back down and head toward the Steelworks. This setup featured a problem with the ramp that came right before the Super Tower, as engines would get stuck in between this turntable and the ramp. This would cause this redesign to not last very long. As we reached the end of 2021, we entered a year of 2022. This is the year where I would get some of the things from 2021 that I missed out on, as well as end up getting some All Engines Go merch. The first 2 updates the layout had for this year was that Brendam Docks would begin its first major redesign. The Cranky from the Mad Dash on Sodor set was replaced with the Cranky from the Animal Park Monkey Adventure set, and the other was that the experimental engine yard got a slight redesign. All the tracks that were elevated were changed to become flat tracks on the ground. However, the route was still the same. The next update would happen in the month of May, when I would finally get a set with a certain yellow crane that was released in 2021. Carly's Crossing. This would mark the end of my old custom Carly from 2017, as she would be replaced with this new one. Other than Carly, the 2 risers from this set would end up being placed on the unfinished spiral, and the green bridge was placed in the Blue Mountain Quarry. Later that July, I would get 2 sets, Race for the Sodor Cup and the Egg 6-in-1 set. The Sodor Cup would go unused on the layout, while the 6-in-1 saw the arrival of a few new parts for the layout. The suspension bridge from the Cargo Race was changed to the new one, the bumpy track was added in between the 2 Tunnel Blast sets in the clay pits, and the risers were used on the unfinished spiral. Sometime shortly after that same month, I would find an amazing steal at a garage sale. I managed to find the 2020 re-release of the Mad Dash on Sodor set for $10. I instantly picked it up as I knew it would be extremely helpful for the layout. The updates this set gave to the layout were, the new spiral had become 90% complete, the Steelworks gained another Y-switch, the siding next to the water tower was changed to be a track that went by a station, which would then attach to the main line, the sections of switches by Tidmouth Bridge would finally be complete. I would also end up using a single piece of classic Trackmaster track here. Augsburg got a section of track removed and changed to go under the ballast chute to get to the shipwreck rail set. And finally, the experimental engine yard would get yet another redesign. Man, the experimental engine yard can't take a break from redesigns, can it? This time, it was turned into a small loop line with only an old style switch needed to finish it. Gee, I wonder how long it will take to get this one. It took forever to get the one to finish the last track to Augsburg. For the next few months, there would be very minor expansions to the layout. Christmas 2022 would see the arrival of the Launch and Loop Maintenance Yard and the Marin Station from the 2-in-1 Transforming Thomas set. Marin Station was the only thing that was added to the layout, as it replaced the other station on the line that was recently added. Talk about a small expansion for the time of year where the biggest expansions usually happen. We now move into 2023. The first update for this year happened sometime between January and April. The experimental engine yard would get a minor curve color change. The brown ramp curve would be changed to an egg green one. Later that May, another location would end up going through its second major redesign. That location was Brendam Docks. On May 3rd, I ended up getting a few new engines, as well as the Talking Cranky delivery train set. The Cranky from the Animal Park set was removed, and Talking Cranky was put in its place. Other than Cranky, the docks now had 2 sets of tracks again. This would mark the first time the docks had 2 lanes since the very start of this layout. The docks redesign even had a beta set up to it. I originally put another demolition at the dock set on the second track, but I thought it looked too awkward, so a day later, I changed it to a small siding. After that day, the layout went 3 months with no expansions, but around the middle of August, I ended up getting a new set at my local Walmart, that being a bridge to Sodor. The main reason I got this set was for the proper colored suspension bridge, so the bridge from the 6-in-1 was replaced with the new one. Moving to October, I would get the Connect and Go track bucket. The risers from this would be used on the new spiral, making it 99% complete. All that was needed to complete it was one more riser, and I would get that riser in December. Christmas 2023 saw the arrival of Percy's Connect and Go bucket and the Crystal Caves Adventure set. The last riser was placed onto the spiral, making it 100% complete. The other pieces of the sets still have yet to be used on the layout, and right now, they are connected together as a mini layout in the middle of Brendam Docks. And in 2024, I would get the Phillip Firehouse in February and the paint delivery set in May. Neither of these are connected to the layout yet. And that brings us to present day, where the layout stands currently. But before I give you a running montage of all the layouts, I will give you all a few sneak peeks at the future plans I have with this layout. So the first thing I plan on doing is moving my bed out of the basement. The reason I am doing this is because I want to move 2 locations to this area, those being the Blue Mountain Quarry and the Sodor Animal Park. The Blue Mountain Quarry will be placed next to the toy box, and on the toy box is where Ulfstead Castle will be located, as well as the Dinosaur Park. The Animal Park will reside next to the Blue Mountain Quarry. The Blue Mountain Quarry will also consist of a majority of the egg sets I have accumulated over the past 2 years, such as Sodor Cup, the track buckets, the 6-in-1, etc. I even made a concept design of how some of this would look back in 2022. Now, I bet some of you are wondering, if I am moving 2 sections of the layout to a new spot, what will be put in the original spots? Well, the reason I got the Phillip Firehouse was because the original location of the Blue Mountain Quarry will become the Sodor Search and Rescue Center. It will feature the Phillip Firehouse, Harold's Helipad, Captain's Dock, the Press and Spin Harold, and the helipad from the Super Cruiser. There will also be a tunnel that will lead to the Troublesome Trap set. This is what I am calling Misty Island. As for the Animal Park's original location, I will be getting the Busy Quarry set and putting it there, as that will become Farquhar Quarry. As for other things, I do want to put Wayland Station somewhere on the mainland, but I have no idea where to put it. I also plan on putting a grass mat down in the front half of the basement. And that is all the future plans I have for the layout. So now let's get to the ultimate running montage of every Trackmaster Revolution layout I have ever made. And that marks the end of the evolution of my Trackmaster 2 layouts. It was quite fun looking back on all the different layouts I've made over the past 10 years and seeing how it all evolved from just a single Sodor Spiral expansion pack to what I have set up now. Another thing I would like to say is that I am so sorry for taking so long to make this thing. The sneak peek for this video was meant to come out in the spring of 2023, but my motivation just wasn't there at that time. But here this video is now for you all to enjoy. And the last thing I would like to say is thank you so much for 2,000. Well then. Thank you so much for 3,000 subscribers. I promise I will have a 3,000 subscriber special out soon, and it won't take as long as this one. Anyway, this is HunterTube saying thanks for watching, bye for now, and I will see you in the next video.
Do you want to know how delayed this thing ended up being? This thing ended up being so delayed that I now have to try and figure out a way to put this Vickerstown station into this tiny corner here! Help me!